Okay, so I finally did it. Decaying Winter has been one of those games that has been requested probably the most on this channel out of anything in the past maybe 2 years. The people who like this game really like this game, and because of that they recommend it over and over and over and over again. And I've had people that told me the warning signs, which is the reason that I simply haven't played this game. Lots of people said the new player experience is awful, you're never going to understand what's going on unless you go onto a wiki or outside source, and because of that you just shouldn't bother. And so I didn't bother. But after it came to my attention that Gravedigger, a game that I think is actually really good, was made by the same person who made Decaying Winter, I figured that maybe it was finally time to give it a go. And unfortunately, I had pretty much the exact experience I thought I would have. So this video aims to point out the mountains and mountains of flaws that Decaying Winter has and why I did not enjoy my time with it whatsoever. I want to make it clear that this video is going to be a much more tempered version of a lot of my other videos. Normally I play it up for the camera, I get mad, I yell a lot, and that's because my videos are meant to be entertaining. But because this is so highly requested and I know the exact kinds of people that I'm going to be dealing with, I don't want to do any of that and I just want to be me. So if you came here expecting a lot of yelling and screaming, you're not going to get any of that. Regardless, for those who may not already know what Decaying Winter is, well, what is this game? When it comes down to it, Decaying Winter is a wave survival game. There are 10 waves that you have to survive, and they get progressively harder as you go on. It's a pretty self-explanatory concept, and it's been done time and time again. Now, the thing that makes Decaying Winter more unique than your standard wave survival game is on top of the stuff that you spawn in with, or your class, your perks, your traits, etc. In order to get any sort of weapons that you want to use against the enemies, you have to scavenge for it on the map. Effectively, there are 2 phases of gameplay, the scavenge phase and the holdout phase. There's one scavenge phase for every holdout phase. So during the scavenge phase, you go out and you pick up items, craft things, etc. So that way during the holdout phase, you'll be better equipped to deal with the enemies that come at you. When it comes to picking up items, you can find all manners of things, whether it be bullets, traps, weapons themselves, antibiotics to heal your infection meter, bandages, med supplies, you name it. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Now that is Decaying Winter at its core, but the real problem with this game is extremely simple to sum up. And that's that this game is effectively a kick in the balls kind of game. It's very similar to a game like Escape from Tarkov, and as someone who has over 3,000 hours in that game, I'd like to say that I'm a bit of an authority on that subject. And unfortunately, despite being clearly inspired by that game, it falls into what I feel like is every single pitfall that that game falls into as well. The most notable thing is, of course, the way that the new player experience is laid out. Decaying Winter doesn't tell you anything. Now this in a game like Gravedigger doesn't really matter. Gravedigger is a self-explanatory game. You spawn in and you go fight the enemies. Bada boom bada bam. And while Decaying Winter on its face is also a simple game, in practice, not so much. There are status effects upon status effects in the game that you can get when taking damage that need all manners of different healing items in order to fix, and just like in Escape from Tarkov, none of this stuff is explained to you whatsoever, so you're not going to know it unless you trial and error or you look it up. The crafting and scrap system, while not incredibly difficult to figure out, once again, not explained whatsoever. The fact that you debuff your entire team when you die, along with the fact that if someone dies around you, you get debuffed, not explained. And so there's just a lot of guesswork going on where if you don't have somebody to directly tell you what these things do or look it up online, you're just gonna be clueless. And this, I'm sorry, is just not good design, plain and simple. I know there's going to be people that are going to be like, well, it's supposed to be hardcore Eclipse, it's supposed to be difficult. But the thing is that you can have difficult games without them being needlessly obtuse. That's just not necessary. I made small mention of the morale system as well as talking about the infection system, and I want to talk about these two things along with the hunger system because I feel like these three systems all don't really have any reason to be in this game. Let's start with morale, probably the worst system in the game. Basically, the way morale works is if a team member dies at any point during the mission, you'll get debuffed, and the more team members that die, the larger the debuff becomes. This debuff makes it so that way you take more damage, do less damage, that kind of stuff. Now, I understand why they tried this. It's very clear that they made this decision because they sort of had a choice. They either make the game quote-unquote hardcore by making it so that way if you die, it's extremely punishing and you don't respawn for a really long time, and therefore there's a whole lot of downtime where you don't get to play, a la Escape from Tarkov. Or they make it so that way you can respawn often, but the punishments are sweeping for everybody around. This is sort of a rock and a hard place situation, because obviously you want people to be playing the game more, but you also want to punish them for getting killed, and you also want to discourage people from just suiciding when they're low on health or affected by status effects, etc. And so it's kind of funny because this terrible system is a product of a whole bunch of other terrible systems. If those terrible systems didn't exist, then this system also wouldn't have to exist. Regardless, the reason the morale system sucks so bad is because it effectively means when you're playing with new players and lower skilled players, you're just gonna lose. Okay, maybe you're not necessarily gonna lose, but you're gonna be severely handicapped. And that just fosters a toxic play environment, no way around it. If nobody wants to be playing with newer players to the game because they'll actively be handicapping them, you have to be able to understand that that's not a healthy thing for a game. You have to. And of course, there's also the matter that the person who is new probably has no idea that the fact that they keep dying over and over again is screwing over your entire team. And I could probably go on, but I don't think there's a very good reason to. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the infection system. This is extremely similar to the morale system in that I just don't understand why they bothered. Basically, while you're on the map, your infection meter is constantly running down, and every time it runs down to 0, it increases your infection level. Your infection level is a simple set of stat debuffs. Each time it increases, you get debuffed some more, debuffed some more, debuffed some more, and eventually it kills you. Now, in order to combat infection, you can find things around the map, and when you use them, it'll reset your infection bar, as well as some things will pause the infection bar for a set amount of time. Now, the reason I bring up the infection bar is, once again, it's another needless debuffing system to hurt your character solely based on RNG of finding items that you might need in order to reset the infection meter. Not only that, but again, since it isn't really well explained, or correction, explained at all on how any of this stuff works, you're just sort of expected to figure it out. So when you start combining the infection system debuffing you with teammates dying around you debuffing you, we're just stacking debuffs on top of debuffs on top of debuffs. And it segues us perfectly into the final debuff in the game, which is food and water. Another needless system that simply didn't need to be here, and I don't know why they went with this other than, oh, other games have it. For my first roughly hour of gameplay, I didn't even notice that I had a food or water bar, because when food and water depletes, it debuffs you pretty substantially. But the indication that you're starved and dehydrated is borderline non-existent. Yes, I know there's 2 bars on the side of the screen, but nothing physically changes around you, so noticing what's happening is, again, unlikely. In order to get food, you have to kill NPCs during the scavenge phase. As far as I understand, that's the only way that you can get food. And so, at the end of the day, the reason I wanted to talk about all 3 systems is that they all compound on top of each other to just massively debuff your character, and, most notably, directly impact someone who doesn't understand how all of these systems work. If you don't really understand morale, if you don't really understand hunger, and you don't really understand the infection, you're getting triple debuffs to your character with basically no understanding as to why, or at least very little. And micromanaging each one of these individual different mechanics that's constantly annoying you subtracts from the overall gameplay itself, because it's not like it's very interesting to be constantly filling bars up by searching out for random items that may or may not spawn around the map. You're already doing that for everything else in the game. And so once you know about a lot of this stuff, when you see these things out in the wild, you can just grab them and use them while you're out there. Anytime you're looting and you see something that deals with infection and you know what you're doing, you'll just take it. If you see an enemy out in the wild, you might kill them to get food and water, whereas a new player might avoid them because they don't want to waste their resources because they don't understand the mechanics yet. And finally, somebody that's new might take some unnecessary risks and get themselves killed thinking that it's really not that big of a deal, meanwhile it screws over everyone else. Overall, like I said, it feels like these systems were directly implemented to just hurt people who don't know what's going on and barely inconvenience the people who do know what's going on. And that, as I've said, is simply poor design. Now I want to talk about difficulty, because a lot of people cite difficulty. They said, this game will kick your ass, this game's hard, yada 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 yada. And unfortunately, because this is a Roblox game, I think a lot of people on this platform don't understand difficulty very well. And to be fair, people from Escape from Tarkov also don't understand difficulty very well, and I think the overlap between these people is pretty large. So I'm going to be doing my best to explain this. I once again want to remind you that I have 3,000 hours in Tarkov. I'm quite good at that game, so this isn't a matter of skill issue, you suck. The problem with difficulty in Decaying Winter is that it's so heavily dependent on not only your teammates, but also simply RNG. This game is so incredibly random, and while you can try to negate some of the RNG factors, sometimes something will just show up out of nowhere and insta-kill you, debuffing your entire team, taking all of your resources, and effectively leaving you at complete square one. When stuff like that happens, it doesn't feel fair, it doesn't feel fun, it doesn't feel like a fair challenge, it just feels frustrating, and it's not fun to play a game like that. In terms of scavenging resources, I thought that ammo was impossible to come by for the first roughly hour and a half of my playtime. That was until I decided to pick up the scanner class and I realized that ammo boxes literally can never spawn inside of the lockers, and most of the things that I was looting was the lockers. You would think that the lockers would be what you would loot. That's just immediate intuition, but that's not how it works. If you want ammo, it spawns randomly around the map, on the ground, on tables, etc. Sometimes inside of floorboards and stuff, so good luck with that one. It just adds yet another layer of confusion where it's like, well, I'm looking around for ammo and I can't find any of it. Where in God's name is it? Oh, it was in the floorboard. Well, why didn't I think of that? And so basically what I'm getting at with all of this stuff is difficulty in this game is not limited to actually how difficult the physical game is. Because when you have guns and you have ammo, for the most part, you can just sit back and it's a shooting gallery. From wave 1 up to wave 10, if your team knows what you're doing and you've got bullets, it's easy mode. This game effectively boils down to one big old knowledge check, which reminds me too much of Escape from Tarkov. In my opinion, when a game comes down to how much you know, rather than how good you actually are mechanically, that's not a great way to deal with balance. I know there are people who disagree with that sentiment, and that's fine, but that's just how I feel about the matter. So I've sort of talked on and on at this point, but I think the most important thing that I want to say about the game, and something that just can't really be summed up unless you've played the game, is that this game just isn't fun. The gameplay loop itself is bland and tedious. You run out, scavenge resources for barely any things, then you shoot the guys assuming you have enough ammo, and if you try to engage in melee combat and don't have the correct class to do so, you get ass blasted, die, debuff your whole team, and then everyone gets mad at you. And it's basically rinse repeat that over and over and over and over again, because this game only takes place on one singular map. There's one map for this. When people were hyping this up like it was the second coming of Christ, I really expected a lot more from the game, and when I got in, I was shocked when it restarted like nothing had happened. Sure, the loot is procedurally generated in a sense, so that way things are not always in the same place all the time, but you can only vary things up so much when it's on the exact same copy-paste map every single time you boot up the game. But regardless, booting up the same map to fight against enemies who, when they hit me, might just give me an arterial bleed that I can't get rid of, so I'm just stuck there bleeding to death, does not exactly strike me as a good time. I'm sure it is for some. Roughly 700 people are playing it right now, and that's great for you guys. But for the rest of us who like a little less kick in the balls and a little more enjoyment in our games, this isn't it. Anyways, I don't think there's really much more that I have to say here. I'll link the game in the description if you want to get a nice kick in the balls and then probably never pick it up again. If you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.